District City Councilor. Today is Monday, May 2nd. I'd like to introduce my colleagues who, in order of their arrival here today. We have the Chairman of Education, Councilor Tito Jackson to my right. To my left, Councilor Tim McCarthy, Councilor Josh Zakem, and Councilor Matt O'Malley. To my immediate left is Councilor Sal LaMattina, and to my far right, Councilor Michelle Wu, Councilor at Large, and Councilor Nisa Sabi George, Councilor at Large. Today's hearing is regarding Boston Public Schools school budget as a topic. We're discussing weighted student funding, supplemental allocations, changes in enrollment and assignment as some of the guiding topics for today's hearings. I'd like to read the dockets into the record at this time. Dockets 0525 through 0527, 0537, and 0543. Orders for the fiscal year 17 operating budget, including annual appropriation and tax order, annual appropriation for the school department, appropriation for other post-employment benefits, appropriation for certain park improvements, and appropriation for certain bridge projects. Also dockets 0528 through 0532, 0534 through 0536, and 0538 through 0542. Orders for the fiscal year 17 capital budget, including loan orders and appropriations amending previous loan orders and lease and purchase agreements. I would like to remind you that this is a public hearing and being broadcast both on Comcast Channel 8 and RCN Channel 82 and recorded for future viewing. I would ask everyone in the chamber to silence your cell phones and electronic devices. At the conclusion of the public schools presentation, questions and answers from my colleagues on the council, we will take public testimony. I'd appreciate it if you would sign in at the sign-in sheet to my left by the front door. Please check off the box if you wish to testify. Please state your name and affiliation or residence, and limit your comments to a few minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. We also will take up to 10 people for online testimony via Google Hangouts at each hearing after in-person testimony. The link to sign up for online testimony is boston.gov/citycouncil/google.asp. So with that, I'd like to welcome the team from Boston Public Schools, the budget team. Thanks for coming, Ellen, and I hope you're feeling better. And
thank you.
I'll hand it over to you for your brief presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Eleanor Lawrence. I'm the Executive Director of School Finance for the Boston Public Schools. I'm joined today by Nate Cooter, our Deputy Executive Director, and David Bloom, our Budget Director. As the counselor said, our topic today is school budgets. We plan to speak for about 10 minutes. Nate will lead you through our presentation, and then we'd be happy to take questions. I mentioned in our overview of the BPS budget last week, of our general fund dollars, about half resides directly on a school budget. When you include the cost of benefits, that's nearly 2/3 of the BPS general fund dollars directly on school budgets. So we're looking forward to diving into that in more detail with you today. With that, I'll turn it over to Nate.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. This morning we're prepared to talk to you about school budgets, and I'm sure that you've heard from some of your constituents or from schools in your districts, and we're prepared to address issues related to those schools this morning. But overall, we're hoping that you leave here today with knowing two things. First, that BPS has been a nationally recognized leader in school financing. Boston has an equitable, transparent way of funding all of our schools, and we strive to make sure that every student receives the same resources no matter which school they attend. This should be and is a point of tremendous pride for us as a BPS finance team. Second, BPS allows those closest to the students to make budgeting decisions, which means that individual schools have the ability to change their budget on a year-to-year basis. So we've structured our presentation today to walk through the rationale for how we allocate money to schools, which is weighted student funding. And since weighted student funding is not a prescription for how money should be spent, we'll also review the data on how those allocations were used by school leaders to support students. Boston has an incredibly strong commitment to public education. No matter how you compare us, we're one of the top districts in per pupil funding. Over the last few years, we've dealt with declining federal and state revenue and rising costs, a structural deficit that you've heard us talk about many times. If not for the commitment of the mayor and the city council, who have filled the gaps from those declines, we would be sitting before you to tell a very different story. So thankfully, we don't have to do that. We're here today to celebrate the largest appropriation in BPS history, which allows us to continue to invest in our schools and invest in our students. As we've noted before, this investment is before collective bargaining agreements for all of our unions are finalized. As I mentioned at the start, Boston has an equitable and transparent way to fund all of our schools. Of the money allocated directly to schools, 85% is allocated through weighted student funding. This also accounts for over 42% of our overall budget. This slide details the 8 categories of direct school funding. Aside from weighted student funding, of the 7 categories, despite being outside our weighted student funding model, this still follows consistent rules or criteria to ensure equitable treatment for all schools. And I would be remiss if I didn't highlight that direct school funding increased $8.2 million over last fiscal year. As an overview for weighted student funding, we like to highlight that weighted student funding puts into practice principles that we want to embody as a district. The first is student focus. Whenever we talk about weighted student funding, we start by talking about the student needs first. The second is equity. We want all students in similar situations to be funded the same way in every school where they attend. The third is transparency. We want to make it very clear to our school community, to school leaders, to the community at large, how it is the school allocation decisions are made and how schools receive their total allocation. We also differentiate based on need. The model is predictable, leads to school empowerment, and is aligned with our overall district strategy. We've prepared a brief overview here of the basic tenets of weighted student funding. And we start with the student. Each student is given a weight that's based on a 1.0 baseline weight plus a grade level weight. In this example of a 3rd grade student, the 0.3 part of the 1.3 represents the weight for that grade. So for each student, you can calculate their base weight, multiply it by the foundation amount, and then you have the allocation for the regular education student in that grade. When you combine all of the students in that grade, in that classroom, you see the total revenue for that classroom. This is the basic formula that applies to all of our categories and follows all of our students. So our school leaders, based on their projected enrollment, the needs of their students, can calculate their own budget exactly the same way that we've calculated it in our weighted student funding templates. I'm going to walk you through 3 examples of school classrooms. The first one is a full classroom. This is a typical 3rd grade regular education classroom with the class size max of 25 students. The revenue that the class brings in is $133,000. The cost of the teacher and the 0.2 specialist for that classroom is $108,000. So the school receives a balance of $24,000. These are purely discretionary dollars that the school can use to pay for partnerships, supplies, or additional supports for their students. When we talk about full classrooms, BPS has some of the lowest class sizes in the state. And so this is our intentional. We feel that full classrooms still represent classrooms that are appropriate to meet the needs of our students. And so our goal is for us to have full classrooms across the district. In many of our materials around weighted student funding, you'll hear about an 87% break-even point. This is based on the calculation that we want a classroom that is 87% full to be able to pay for itself. And in this example of a 3rd grade classroom, again, 21 students is 87% full. It brings in a revenue of $111,000 to the school, the cost of $108,000. You can see that this this model pays for itself at the 87% break-even point. For each of the categories of students, this holds true so that we can set that target as a district based on the class size. The final example is of a half-full classroom. So the district has a challenge with under-enrolled classrooms. This leaves school leaders with both academic and financial challenges. There are 3 strategies when a school has a half-full classroom. The first, the school may decide to take money generated through full classes and other grades or programs and cover the cost within their budget. It may be at the expense of other investments that the school is making. The second is that the school may decide to consolidate this classroom across either grades or programs. The third is that if the school is unable to employ either of these strategies and cannot balance their budget, the district is compelled to provide a sustainability allocation, which is another funding mechanism where we help support schools that don't have enough enrollment to support their costs. Weighted student funding is how we ensure both equity and differentiation based on need. In order to achieve our intentionally lower class sizes, weighted student funding is higher for students with higher need who require both smaller classes and more intensive support. And again, I just want to emphasize that our district standard for class size and staffing models meets or exceeds the state in all categories. Our next slide talks about changes to school budgets. We did increase our base funding, almost $10 million, to support higher salaries for schools. So where we have, in the case where a school has the same mix of students, the same enrollment, they're able to afford their same staffing based on the increased cost of those salaries. As we considered how to implement reductions overall, we did contemplate across-the-board reductions in weighted student funding, ultimately deciding instead to make specific special education changes. And I certainly want to emphasize that these kind of changes to weights and school funding are a last resort. We hear the frustration, disappointment, and passion for serving our students that principals express during the budgeting and staffing process. And we hope that we are putting ourselves on a path that such changes will not be needed again next year. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our many school principals and headmasters for their leadership as they navigate this process. Over and over, I'm struck and impressed by the passion, dedication, and creativity of our school leaders. The culture of we that we've been talking about as a district has been on display again and again as we figure out how to best serve our students. With that, I just want to provide a little more detail on the specifics. For FY17, the district changed weighted student funding for autism, emotional impairment, and inclusive settings with an unknown disability. For autism, we updated their staffing guidance for programs to reflect a class size of 10 students with 1 teacher and 2 paraprofessionals. For emotional impairment, we updated their staffing guidance for EI programs to reflect classrooms of 10 students with 1 teacher and 1 para, both increasing the class size by 1 student. And for students with unknown disability, this is the case where we have an inclusion classroom where we have not yet assigned a student or not yet identified a student to transition from a substantially separate setting into an inclusionary setting. When we don't know the disability of the student, we now are projecting the average weight for our special education students, which changed it from a 4.3, the highest weight they could have received, to the average weight of 3.0. When you're looking at our weighted student funding template, the $4,100 that I've circled here shows how we adjust for rising teacher costs. So for the average traditional school, we've accounted for rising teacher costs and salaries by increasing the base weight for the model. So we check every year to make sure that a school who's not receiving any of the other changes can afford their core staffing needs. This year, we've provided a school-by-school allocation one-pager that shows year-to-year changes in weighted student funding as well as all other allocations. One of the things that we emphasize in the finance department is transparency in allocations. So on our website, bostonpublicschools.org/budget, you can find all of the documents related to school allocations. This includes what we refer to as our overall allocation tracker. It shows all schools and how their allocation is built. The weighted student funding templates for each school, and then these one-pagers for each of the schools to be able to see how their total allocation compares to what they received last year. I mentioned earlier the concept of a sustainability allocation. When weighted student funding in BPS was introduced, we introduced it with the concept of a soft landing, which is to say, anytime we make a change in policy that results in a loss of funding for a school, we look at whether or not we want to provide a transitionary assistance or transitionary funding plan for those schools during that change. This is what we call a soft landing. It's literally a softening of the decline that would come from a loss in funding for policy. The other is a sustainability allocation. Those allocations are given to schools who cannot fund themselves using the allocation that they were given, meeting our core compliance standards. The weighted student funding model is not the only thing affecting individual schools. While academic challenges facing each school are varied and complex, the financial realities of our schools fall into 4 basic categories. First, changes in funding due to changes in enrollment. If a school loses enrollment from year to year, their funding will change. This also, if the mix of students at the school changes, they're serving less students with need, their funding allocation will change. The second is decreased funding due to changes in student weighting, which I talked about this year affecting our schools serving students with disabilities. The third challenge is unique to our autonomous schools who pay on actual salary and who will be feeling the changes in teacher cost differently than our traditional schools. And finally, schools will feel a change in funding based on changes in district support after multiple years of district cutbacks and multiple years of changes to the way that we staff some special education programs. Schools may be receiving a change in allocation for those programmatic support. I'll end with a summary of what we see across schools. First, our overall allocation to schools is up $8 million versus last year. We've noted that individual schools may experience greater shifts for one reason or another, such as enrollment changes, but overall we're increasing our funding going directly to schools. We also expect the number of teachers to be approximately flat, and our student-to-teacher ratio remains below state and collective bargaining limits. Continuing our trend towards inclusion, our number of regular education teachers will fall, while the number of special education teachers will rise, and special education spending overall is expected to grow 3.4%. We also see an increase in bilingual teachers, as well as spending overall on bilingual and SEI programs. Schools have proposed other changes to balance their budget. This includes a 2.6 reduction in school staff, and we're expected to see 2 categories particularly impacted, which are school administrators and our community field coordinators. This is in line with both positions being the most discretionary within a school building. And then finally, weighted student funding continues to support equity and transparency for our school, and there's a link to more detailed documents online that you can go and look school by school. With that, I will.
Thank you. Thank you, Nate. We've been joined by District City Councilor Andrea Campbell, at-large City Councilor Ayanna Presley, District City Councilor Frank Baker, and at-large Councilor Michael Flaherty. I'm going to pass it off to the Chairman of Education, Councilor Tito Jackson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Can you run us through, so you're saying there's an $8 million increase year over year versus last year. What's the increase in cost? So, and the reason why I bring that up is, we've been compiling the actual losses, and I know there's been some restoration, but there are still schools in District 1, my friends over there. The Guild is still losing $281,329. Excel still has a gap. The Lee School is losing $253,000. They're also going to lose their award-winning debate team. The clap is still losing $53,000. So there's the restoration. One, can you explain to us what actually happened there? But two, so you're stating the allocation, but you're not stating the actual increase in salaries. So there obviously is a difference between how much you've allocated versus what the actual cost is. So can you denote for us what that is?
So I first would say on the weighted student funding, the $8 million represents a level service increase to cover the cost of the teachers. So to your question of how much it would have cost with rising salaries, except for the reductions in weighted student funding for special education students. So that's the only place where level service was not covered by the weighted student funding model.
Okay, so earlier on in your presentation, you actually had guiding principles of equity and transparency. So what you're saying is special education students, who are some of our most vulnerable students, are the students that we actually took the money from and changed the weighted student formula. So can you drill down again? What does it do for autistic students? What are they, increased class size, any staffing changes for those students who have trauma and ELD 1 through 3?
We will be back here, is it next week or the week after, with our special education team, and we'll have an entire hearing on that. I can say...
Guys, hold on. We can't do this. You can't punt every single time. And so we're speaking about weighted student formula. We're speaking about the changes that you're making in special education and for autistic students, and we can't punt it to the next hearing. We did that last time.
Would you like me to? I was going to say I am not a special education expert, so my colleagues who will join me will speak more with an educational background. However, what I can say from a finance point of view is that, and you alluded to it in your question, weighted student funding is how we take our dollars and give them to schools. It is a different question about how our school leaders choose to spend those dollars. And I'm glad you highlighted that difference, which I think is a really important distinction for us to highlight. We have worked and partnered very closely from the central office team with our school leaders to make sure that every one of our classrooms can maintain the programming it needs and every school is served. More than half of the changes that were related to special education are being reinvested in special education as part of the special education team's vision long-term, where they want to take our delivery of services for our most vulnerable students. We are very proud of the reinvestments that we're making that we think are going to be in the best interest of kids. A new data system so that we can better understand service delivery, and parents can walk out of IEP meetings knowing the services their kids are going to get. Teams that are going to be working closely in schools with teachers, paraprofessionals, school leaders, and administrators to move students into the least restrictive environment. Transition services for children who are aging out of our special education services. As I said, the distinction between how we allocate dollars through WSF and the individual decisions that are made by our school leaders is reflected in the fact that our special education spending is still actually going up by $9 million.
So, but the changes in special education staffing assumptions go down by $5 million, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the themes that you've said in the past has been around less on the central side and more on in the classroom side. So I guess my question here is that, so your autism weight went down from 4.3 to 3.9. Why? Why did the emotional impairment weight go down from 3.5 to 2.7 for the all grades? Why is that happening, and what does that do? You just got the MOVA grant for $1 million to try to help us deal with trauma. But if we're taking away from these assets in the classroom direct to student space, increasing class sizes, and how does that help those individual students? yeah, we need to turn IEPs around quicker. That is very important. How does that help those individual students, and how does it not hurt them, right? Because you're saying equity. So equity would mean that our special education students would actually do better versus those general education students.
As I said, I believe that our team is deeply committed to and confident that we're going to work with every school to ensure that the programming remains at the same level of quality that it is today. There are classrooms across BPS that will have one additional student in them in the autism and EI strands. I will also note that a number of our school leaders, to navigate this change, made changes elsewhere in their building. So just because the WSF formula had a change in special education, in no way mandated that those school leaders made changes. It opened the door for them to do so with our guidance around staffing, but they made changes also to administration and made changes outside the classroom as well.
And so, and on the enrollment front, so you're speaking about classes that are not as full as you would like them. I've spoken to schools that actually have huge waiting lists, but your enrollment folks don't allow those students to go in there. And even when you look at a school like Madison Park Vocational Technical High School, the number of students who actually gave it a 1 actually is a lot less than the number of students that enrollment allowed to go there. So how, from an equitable approach or a demand-based approach, like a school like Snowden, that actually has much more additional capacity and a very long waiting list, how is that? How are you allocating on the enrollment side?
I'm glad you asked that. You're hitting on something that we think is an area where we can do better. We are deeply focused on partnering with our school leaders to make sure that our enrollment and assignment process is more transparent going forward than it has been in the past. And we have initiated work with them in partnership with our school leaders to review and make some adjustments to how we do enrollment and assignment. Having said that, I will also say that the waitlist issue sometimes creates a little bit of confusion. Students can be on multiple wait lists, and our central team that does spend a good amount of time picking up the phone and calling often gets little traction in moving students off of wait lists. So I think that does sometimes cause some confusion.
So I'm going to have to pass it back, but the weighted student formula component, what is the change in the base weight from this year versus last year? Is there a change?
Yes.
Last year's base weight of 1.0 was $4,028. This year's base weight is $4,100.
Okay. And so I guess I would say the changes that have occurred to special education and weighted student formula has essentially taken whole milk and changed it into skim milk. We have not given schools the same level, in particular for special education students and trauma students, that they actually need to deliver those services. And that's, again, based on the top line allocation that has come from the mayor's office and gone to you, and you're stringing it out as much as you can. But this actually is not a fair and equitable way to push money out, and actually is going to, I believe, give less service to those young people, particular autistic students, as well as those trauma students. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor McCarthy.
Brief as everybody's here. I just want to go back to the slide where you had the general education class with 50% full. And this touches to a point where I met with BCLA. BCLA is in my district. It's a wonderful school. I met with the principal, several teachers, including the student government people, and the president. The student president, a wonderful young man who made his decision to go to Tufts over, I think it was MIT. So he said jumbo rather than going to MIT. Good call, but very qualified individual. It's a wonderful school. They're receiving cuts this year, yet they have a waiting list. So I don't understand why we're not filling seats with kids who want to go to BCLA, and we're basically punishing them with the weighted student funding by not filling those seats. Because with a school producing the students like BCLA is producing, the list is lengthy. So can you just dig deeper into why they would have a waiting list at all?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things around BCLA that are interesting. As I mentioned before, BCLA is one of our autonomous schools. They're a horseman charter, which means they're an in-district charter school. This means that they're budgeting on actual salaries, and so they're experiencing increased salary costs. Sorry, excuse me, they're not a horseman charter, I apologize. They're a pilot school. So they're experiencing the autonomous school salary increases at a greater rate. The other thing is a pilot school, they do have more autonomy over their admissions practice, so I can't speak to BCLA's the way that they admit students in the same way that a traditional high school would. I know that the headmaster would partner with the enrollment office to work on how many students are admitted in any given year. So they have a little bit more control, but we can look more into filling that school because it is, I know, one of our great high schools.
Okay, I respect the answer, but I don't think it's complete. I met with the principal, I met with the students, I met with the teachers who are, there's possibility of losing a librarian, which ends their accreditation. I mean, silly stuff, really stuff that's silly when you're hurting a school that's achieving at a very high level. So if she's working with the enrollment office and they say to her, you can't have any more students, according to this slide, she's going to lose money, which then makes her lose her librarian, which then makes these kids lose their accreditation, which puts us in the spot of people moving out of the city once again because they can't get an education that they've signed up for.
I think Nate provided some high-level overview of how the enrollment works with our autonomous schools. Why don't we take a look at what's going on specifically at BCLA, and we can get back to you.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Zakem.
Most of my interest or my focus on the school's budget is on the capital side and trying to get a downtown K-8 school, which I will continue to raise in these hearings. But I do join my colleagues, though. I mean, we do have many folks who, because it was not a downtown K-8, are still sending their students to other schools and making sure that we have the appropriate level of funding, making sure that, as Councilor McCarthy is just talking about, that our popular schools, our schools that are doing well and are achieving, are able to continue doing that. And, as we get into this, whether it's weighted student funding, other revenue or funding sources for our schools, I think it is very important to make sure that we're bringing all of our schools up to a high achieving level in every neighborhood to, prevent that, as Councilor McCarthy was just saying, folks leaving the city of Boston because not only do they not have a neighborhood school they can go to, as is the case for many of my constituents, but that if they have a school that's been achieving at a high level, like BCLA, to have to face cuts like this. So I guess I don't really have a question. That's more of a little comment on this in general. But I know you are all working hard on this, and we do need to make sure that, although the school budget is the largest, obviously, portion of the city budget, making sure individual schools are funded at a level that can allow them to maintain high levels of achievement, high best outcomes for our students is incredibly important. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Matt O'Malley.
More detail on weighted student funding, and I think, for simplicity's sake, it explains a full class could generate a $25,000 surplus, a 87% full class, essentially break even, slight surplus of $3,000, and a 50% half full class would be a $45,000 deficit. How many of our classrooms are at 50% capacity? Is this thing on, Mr. Chair?
Yes. It is a great question.
Thank you.
Our data systems don't currently allow us to answer it, and I feel horrible saying that. However, I will say that the issue of how much capacity we have in the Boston Public Schools has obviously been in the headlines as an issue a lot of people are interested in. We are sprinting, and this is a top priority for myself personally and our team to have a good answer to that. It is frustrating that our data systems don't currently allow us to do it, but we are partnering with our school leaders to try to improve that right now.
Okay.
Sorry, I could try another angle of answering that, which is to tell you that we have, how many schools do we have on sustainability allocation? No, 8. We have 8 schools who receive sustainability allocations.
What does that mean?
So it means that for the vast majority of our schools, of the, I think it's 123 schools who receive their budgets through WSF, they're able to make it work. The dollars they get through weighted student funding fund their classrooms and other stuff. We have 8 schools where the money that they get does not allow them to meet the basic needs of their students in accordance with our collective bargaining agreements and state and federal regulations. So while I can't answer your question at the classroom level, I can say at the school level, 8 out of 123 are operating at a level where they are likely below these percentages, and the formula does not fund what it is that they need to offer in their schools.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm not trying to open up a larger policy discussion on what has been in the press and what the actual figures are in terms of potential school closures or empty seats. I'm simply trying to wrap my head around the fact that we are told repeatedly we're making increases, we're increasing the budget, the bottom line to the BPS, yet we are all hearing from countless parents and students and teachers who are incredibly worried and anxious and nervous about cuts that are happening. Weighted student funding as a model works. It's something that was introduced shortly after I was elected to this body. It clearly offers more transparency and openness, and of course the money ought to follow the students, not the buildings. But I must say it is very disappointing that as we're sitting here debating this budget, trying to wrap our head around where the money goes, that those simple questions cannot be answered. I'm not trying to, you know, trip you guys up here. I just need to know the answers to these things, because it would seem to me that in the rosy scenario with a fully staffed class, you could see how schools could protect so many of these services that are seen to be cut. But we don't know the answer to that. And when you say 8 out of 123 schools receive sustainability, that partially answers part of the question, but not a lot. So we're going to need that answer. I don't understand why your data collection service can't answer that when you could call every school principal and they could tell you those answers. We take attendance every day. We know. I mean, we can figure this question out. This shouldn't be another hearing where we can't get these simple questions answered. So it's disappointing to me that because I think that tells a lot about how we're going to fund our schools. You know, the SPED changes is also of concern to me. I support inclusion as a model. I know it works. I can count to 10 schools that I know are doing it extremely well. I had breakfast with Bill Henderson 2 weeks ago, a pioneer in Boston Public School and an inclusion model, and he makes a compelling point about the expectations and what we need to have. But when you change that level and then increase class size, I do worry about how our special education students will be able to continue to receive the services. I think that BPS does special ed better than most urban districts, and I would hate to see that be changed or threatened in any way. I've also been hearing, and I know my colleagues have as well, from a number of the ELCs, particularly the West Zone ELC in my district, which is looking at nearly a $500,000 budget cut. That wasn't what they initially were told. That seemed to have come a little bit more recently. Can you talk why that cut is needed and how you arrived to that number.
As we implemented WSF, we've been taking a historic system that had a lot of legacy pockets of funding for individual programs and schools, and over time trying to increase the equity of the distribution of those pots of money. There is, we highlighted some of the numbers on this in our last hearing, a fairly significant, I think the number is $4.2 million, is spent above and beyond WSF at these 5 sites. The per pupil allocation at the sites above WSF ranges from $4,700 to $9,300. And we brought the school leaders together in March to talk about how over time we can move to a model that is both more equitable among the 5 of them, because that range is, a 2x range of how much they're getting, but also to build models that are more scalable, that we can bring more and more students into an early childhood, early education center or early learning center modeled with extended hours. So again, it was, as we looked across the spectrum of our early childhood education, to have 5 centers that are serving, I think, approximately 1,000 students, just under 800, thank you, David. Out of the 12,000 students that are served in our early childhood grades, we felt like the relatively incremental changes that we were making in that category were in support of our overall K-1 and early childhood efforts.
Yeah, but I guess I would just take issue with relative incremental, and I understand, and this is one of the things I'm trying to wrap my head around, is that we are told constantly we spend so much per pupil, we're adding more money, yet we're seeing these costs, and it's unfair to the parents, the people that we're trying to lure back into this system, that quite frankly isn't growing the way it ought to be growing, to just see these additional cuts. And admittedly, ELCs receive more money, and it's very young children, but the attractiveness and the strength of this program, I think, could be threatened if we scale back a $500,000, allocation to just one center. All right, that's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I would just ask a quick follow-up. So of the 8 schools that get the sustainability allocations, are the ELCs 5 of them? Or is that a separate allocation?
That's a separate allocation. The EECs, ELCs would fall under what we consider a programmatic support. That's funding to support a specific program at a school. The sustainability allocations are to primarily elementary schools for their just core programming.
And is it due mostly because of the lack of enrollment or not enough students to bring the weight up to fund the basics?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the sustainability allocations are an indication of a undersubscribed school.
All right. I'd like to have the names of those schools as well, please.
Would you like us to provide those now?
If you have them, sure.
So the 8 schools. Sorry. Oh. It happened at the same time. The 8 schools are the Perry K-8, the Philbrook, the Bradley, the P.J. Kennedy, the GRU, the Winship, the Allegheny Montessori, the Clapp Innovation School.
Clapp. Okay. Chair recognizes Councilor Michelle Wu.
Mr. Chairman, good morning, everyone. I think this information might be online. My staff is sending me some links that I'm looking through. But last year at this hearing, we were just given a one-pager that had all of the weights line by line compared to the year before and what the changes were. Is it possible to get that?
Yes, that's both available online, and we can send it to the council for.
It would be great. Thank you. Would love to just see everything in the full context. How does so again, I'm going to go back to what I was saying at the initial hearing around the stress and the uncertainty of the budget changes given the calendar. Do you anticipate that these changes to weighted student funding in the timing of everything you'll be able to anticipate it enough in advance for a multi-year projection when you get to that point. Because again, I think that's what schools will need to know with predictability who they can and can't hire, how they can and cannot grow their programs year to year. And talking about the West Zone ELC, they're often given these huge budget changes very late in the season and then asked to kind of manage from that point on.
Yes, that's exactly the reason why Dr. Chang kicked off our long-term financial planning this fall. And there are certainly a lot of things, as you can imagine, that are outside of our control. As we look on a multi-year time horizon, there are possibilities. What will happen with the economy and the tax base? So what will happen to our revenue? What will happen with the number of charter seats, which would affect our enrollment and therefore projections? While recognizing those very significant uncertainties, our intention with our long-term financial planning is to allow that kind of stability.
Is it a conversation just within BPS or with the general fund and Chief Sweeney's office as well? Because to me, it's sounding like it's got to be a situation where if you're going to project out several years in the future, it's not only taking your best guess at those things, but the commitment from the general fund that if it doesn't go according to what you thought, the city will be there to back it up, and so that you can give schools actual stability.
We are working very closely with the city team on this topic.
Okay. And then I'm just curious, what else is sort of on the list of, you mentioned the data issue and enrollment as being on your list of short priorities. What are the other major type of questions that we're looking to fix or be able to have the answers to?
Yeah, I think Nate kicked off saying that the education finance in the city of Boston has been nationally recognized. We've been at the vanguard of implementing weighted student funding. Others have looked to us for how we do it. Having said that, it is still a live and dynamic tool that needs to grow and get better every year. And so starting in a week or two, we're kicking off a series of sessions with our principals and headmasters. We're inviting them to come talk to us about what adjustments they want to see in weighted student funding and our enrollment process and our long-term financial planning for the coming years. This is the moment in the year for us to do that so that our team can hear from them, think about changes that are necessary, and have them ready by next fall. So we are actively working on what we call internally our WSF refresh, which will involve inviting in our school leaders and others in our community to talk about what things we need to tweak to continue to be at the cutting edge of serving our schools.
But are there any, I guess my question is, just like it's a major issue not to know how many classrooms are filled at what levels of enrollment, are there any major questions like that we don't know how to answer and that we need better data or better data systems to answer?
Good question. I think you hit on the number one priority for our team is that we feel like we best support our school leaders when we can help them make their classrooms as full as they want them to be. And so that's why we're engaging in this dialogue with them and why we're so focused on investing in our enrollment and projections process. That would, I think, hit number one on my list. Our WSF refresh would be a close second of the projects we're working on. Is there anything else from a data point of view you guys want to mention?
Two, that we're investing in the special education data management system, particularly interested in being able to track service delivery more closely and be able to differentiate student need in finer detail. The second thing is transportation is a significant cost for us, and we're always trying to look for efficiencies in how we serve our students. And so we're looking at being able to track ridership for our buses and investing in a data system to be able to do that.
Got it. And can you just go, I know there's a separate hearing on SPED and ELL, but can you just go one level of detail into the service delivery and student need pieces? What does that mean?
And Carla Estrada, our
Yep.
Deputy Superintendent for Academics and Student Support, will definitely be able to speak in more detail about this. But I would say that what we're looking to be able to do is have better individual education plan management, which allows us to be able to report better on student services, what the requirements are, how they're being filled, tracking the minutes of those. And what I mean by differentiation of student need, we often talk about our high needs students, particularly if we take the example of students with autism. All students with autism who are in a substantially separate class are considered one weight, whereas anyone who teaches autism would tell me that there's such a spectrum of need, even on the high end. So we were not able to differentiate students with need who are at risk or may have recently been in an out-of-district placement versus those students who are ready for inclusion or ready for a less restrictive environment. So we want to be able to use a new system to be able to dive into our IEP data more closely in more detail and be able to flesh out some of that information about our student needs and identify new ways of differentiating student need at all levels.
Got it. Well, I look forward to delving into it more at the other hearing, but thank you. Really helpful to hear that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Chair Siomo, and I will not make eye contact at you once during my period of questions.
It's all right. I have other ways.
So start that clock. Just for full disclosure, thank you all for being here today. For full disclosure, my children attend the Perry School, which is one of your schools under sustainability programs. I know that that school costs the city money every single year. Can you just name those 8 schools for me again very quickly?
They're the Perry, the Philbrook, the Bradley, the PJ Kennedy, the GRU, the Winship, the Allegheny Montessori School, and the Clapp Innovation School.
And so just for a point of interest and I think a point of concern, aside from my own children's school, 3 of those 8 schools are all located in East Boston. And that's, I think, needs to be of particular interest as we think about supporting communities and the communities that our schools are in. So last week when you were here, you talked about Madison Park's budget that hasn't been adjusted yet for some money that it's due to receive maybe from the state. Can you speak a little bit about that? Has there been an update to that?
I would say that, so there's 2 pieces of it. The Madison Park is working on their, as a level 4 school, they're working on their school redesign grant application. So that's the part of the funding that's outstanding in terms of external funds. Internally, we're working with Madison Park to identify what their programming will be and what kind of additional support they need in order to fulfill both their vocational and academic vision for the school.
And as I understand it, we're millions of dollars away from their budget being complete.
No, I would say that the final budget document.
I've got one saying no, one shaking his head yes.
The difference between what is listed as the allocation right now and what their final allocation will be in the millions. But we're close to finalizing and having a public number that we can say this is the budget. So internally, we are very close to being able to finalize the Madison Park budget.
So what does close to mean? What's that timeline? The next time that we're at a BPS hearing, will we have that information regardless of the BPS topic?
We have 2 hearings this week, so I don't think it'll be finalized by the next 2 hearings. We have one this afternoon and one on Thursday. But we can get back to you with a date for when
so
that
maybe
will be
next
finalized.
week? Next week, perhaps? All right, that's fine. Just we'll leave it there. So I've got a few overarching concerns, and then I've got some specific concerns. And so first on comments, wait lists when it comes to our enrollment office should be a better partnership with the individual schools. That has to happen because the only way for us to be proactive about filling empty seats is to partner with that school that can start reaching out to parents so there aren't large gaps from when a seat becomes empty and when a seat becomes full. I think that family engagement needs to play a much bigger role in that piece. I think that family engagement also needs to play a bigger role in some of our publicity and promoting BPS. And what frightens me as a new city councilor and participating in this process is that most of our parents are seeing this. And if I were a new parent, with a 2-year-old, I'd be running screaming from BPS, listening to sort of this process and hearing about these cuts from the early learning centers, all of them, to our high schools, all of them. And we've got to figure out a way to make all of that work best. For our conversation today, though, I want to focus on what's happening in our libraries. As a former high school teacher, our library was critical to our accreditation process, which I participated in our last round at the high school I taught at. And I know across the city, we've got huge gaps in what we have for librarians. In our high schools, out of our 35 high schools, we have 13 librarians. In the data scarier than that. 2009, BPS had a long-range plan released for library planning. And some of the goals were BPS should assess its library space, staffing, collections, that students should have and staff should have better access to fully functioning libraries in accordance to national standards, that high school libraries should meet national accreditation standards, that library staff should be professionals, and we should be working towards moving paraprofessional librarians into professional status, that that we should have library curriculum. Talk to me about our libraries across the system.
One of the tenets of our organization is empowering school leaders, and there are certain things which fall in the domain of central control and others that are in school control. Libraries are something that are at the control of our headmasters and school leaders.
What about making them centrally funded?
We could do that. It would be a trade-off.
Right now there's a 25% cut in our librarian funding for the year. And if they're central to accreditation, if we're not impressing upon school leaders that librarians are critical to accreditation, if we've got to pick between math and ELA teachers and a librarian, as a school leader, math and ELA becomes the priority. But when we talk about accreditation, we talk about equal access and opportunity for our kids to great library facilities. We're setting the kids up for failure, and we're setting our schools up for failure. And when we get to accreditation time with each of our schools, that's a significant problem. 25% cut in library services.
So I think it's interesting. I mean, when we work with our school leaders on their budgets, and this is a long process where we start in mid-December, it goes through the first week in February working with the school leaders. I'm not often very popular when I suggest that we should do more central decision-making and push more funding to the central level and control it for schools. I think our school leaders will typically tell us, give me the allocation, allow me to make the decisions. And so I think high schools have had to make difficult trade-offs. And what we see is they will make the trade-off to cut librarians in lieu of some other services. And that's not to say that every high school is the same, but we see that they differentiate. So we do continuously evaluate which services should be what we consider school services budgeted centrally, and which of those things we should take out and push through the weighted student funding model. And I think librarians and library services in general is one that we could look at more. I will also just say that we have a new head of library services who is doing an assessment of each of our libraries and comparing it to the standards for those libraries. You guys may recall 6 or 7 years ago when our IT department did a similar activity of going through and assessing every school and identifying where they were at in terms of their technology infrastructure, and then aligning every school in a refresh so that we were continuously going from school to school and making sure that they had met the BPS standards for technology infrastructure. I think this is an opportunity for us to do the same sort of assessment on libraries to say, does it meet our standards for library infrastructure, and then how will it meet, and how will we meet the school's need for that?
I am a fan of school autonomy and giving school leaders sort of that authority and that privilege. But it does concern me, especially when we talk about accreditation, when schools put in that librarian for that accreditation or the reaccreditation year and then pull them back just so they get through that process. It's not fair to our kids. It's not fair to our families. It's not fair to school supporters who help fund libraries and schools, and then kids don't have access to that, to those resources. It's incredibly frustrating. I do have one more question, and then I'll come back for rounds. athletics. I see that there's been, and for full disclosure, I'm a former high school coach. There's been a 45% cut in our athletic instructors, our athletic coaches, and I'm curious as to why that is, and how do we think we're going to engage those kids that use sports as their carrot?
Could you tell me where you're referring to that 45% cut?
Page 6 of the budget. That's my note says. So page 6, just under support, you've gone from 606,000 to 334,000, which is a loss of 44.9%.
The reason we're hesitating is because all of the essential athletic budget was not affected, and so we're taking a quick look to see the numbers that you're referring to.
Yeah, when I look on our program budget, which is the view of our budget that shows allocations for different uses like athletics, we're showing a level service funding for athletic programs, so I'll need to get back to you in terms of...
Maybe we can talk about that offline.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Councilor Campbell.
Most of my questions I'll save for when we have the specific special ed ELL hearing towards the end of the month. But just going back to a couple of things. One, I want to echo what Councilor O'Malley said. That was actually in line with a couple of questions I had, specifically at the classroom level. And frankly, it is disturbing that we can't actually get that data. I think with the facilities plan, as someone's going around from school to school, maybe we add this as a question to ask the principals as a way in which to get this information. I think it's extremely important, just in overall planning. So I'm still a little confused about the weighted formula, and I'm going to keep my questions very general. But right now, so the base formula has gone up. So if you have a classroom of resource room students, a school can actually see an increase in the budget for that classroom.
Yes.
Okay.
The dollars would go up.
The dollars would go up for that classroom.
But the dollars are going up to pay for the increasing salaries. So it would fund the same number of FTEs as it did this year. Dollars go up, FTEs are flat. Does that make sense?
Yes. So in this sort of the second scenario, that same school, if they had a classroom for, say, for example, autistic students, could see a reduction in the funding they're receiving for those autistic students.
Yes. And again, sorry, go ahead.
Keeping it very general.
Yes.
I find that questionable. That whole concept that a resource room classroom could get more funding in the year than a room that serves autistic students. I said in the last hearing, I applaud this idea of using the inclusion model and using it more proactively, but we also know that the inclusion model doesn't work for every student. So most of my questions are around the weighted formula and why cut those high-risk students or change the formula there and then increase the resource room or the base formula for, sorry, general ed students. Because for me, that scenario itself, the fact that a school could see an increase in funding for a resource room, but see a decline in funding for those who we know to be very special needs, is what I'm hearing from most families, also school leaders. So I have young achievers, for example, in my district who are very concerned about that, because not only they are serving the same students, they're going to be serving more students next year who come with very distinct and special needs. So that being said, this goes back to the question I posed the last time, which was the overall strategy of the budget that BPS sort of used, which was to increase funding for certain programs. So obviously special ed funding is going up, so we're adding more programming, but we're doing that by cutting other things that we know to work. So I'm just curious, when developing this strategy and looking at changing the weighted formula, if there was a reliance on studies or something that said that if a school changes the weighted formula from, I guess it's a 4.3 to 3.9 for autistic students, for example, obviously there's others in the high-risk category, that's not going to change the programs or what they're delivering to the students in that classroom, if that makes sense.
It does. And I appreciated your comment last week as well. Stepping back a bit in terms of the overall broad strategy of where we invest as a district, there are 4 areas in which we've been investing, and they are very research-backed. Education, the academia of education is complicated and messy, but there are a number of places that come through time and again where studies show this makes an impact for kids. Early education,
Yep.
extended learning time, and teacher quality. And all 3 of those have been major initiatives of the last couple of years and have been preserved in this budget. The 4th area of investment that I was going to say is also on data systems that allow us to build for the future and get our fiscal house in order. So across those areas, I feel like the research base is actually quite solid in supporting the areas we've chosen to invest
in.
Yeah.
And that I understand, but we're making these investments at the cost of other programming that we know to work. Or we're making these investments at the cost of weighted formulas that we know to work. And that's my problem. I can't wrap my head around that, and I cannot come up with an adequate explanation to explain to a parent or a school leader that that strategy works. So my question at this point, as we continue the budget process with BPS, is what's the conversation about reversing the course on the weighted formula piece? Because frankly, if I'm a school who does not have extended learning time, and I know that's important, and at some point I hope to get it, I wouldn't want to cut certain programs for autistic students or the weighted formula to get it. And so what's BPS's internal conversations about possibly reversing course and some of these plan changes in order to fund these other investments?
At this point, we are not in active conversations about reversing course for FY17 for WSF. Our school leaders have worked with us very closely. Almost every single budget, almost every single school has a balanced budget for next year. Hiring and planning has already begun, and our departments are very closely working with every school to make sure that every classroom has what it needs. I think that the bigger question is what we do on a multi-year timeline, and to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation of needing to make changes like this again in the future. And that's why we are so committed to our long-term financial planning.
And I understand that. I don't know how much time I have left. I understand that, but my concern is at the same time the school leaders are adjusting their budget and making it work, and I applaud them because they're making it work. They're also talking to each and every one of us about how hard that is, how challenging that is. They're also saying, well, if you can do something about this, that would be great. And so I sit here wondering how much power we really have to change anything, to advocate for anything. We can be having these hearings over and over again, but if we're not pushing you guys to have conversations about reversing course, then what are we doing? I'll end with that because that's the frustration. That's the frustration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Council Presley.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to try to stick to my questions, and then I may make some statements. So in terms of the Madison Park budget, do you know what percentage of students at Madison Park are students receiving special education services? And I'd like to know what this redesign, and I mean, I have to say, when you say level 4 Madison Park High School, it is just like a hit to my gut every time, you know, because we have just failed this school and this school community for decades. And so, you know, the fact that we're still sort of in a period of recalibrating is incredibly frustrating. So I would just like to know what percentage of those students are receiving special education services. And since it is a vocational school, and in terms of best practices, we know that vocational schools per pupil, comparatively to any other school model, have to make a higher investment because it is a vocational school. So I just want to know what that impact will be with the adjustments in weighted student funding. And if you don't have that now, then just add it to the running list. And okay.
And I will note that we agree with you. and we have had a programmatic supplemental allocation. Madison Park gets more money for doing vocational ed. Last year was the figure 2.2, sorry, I don't know the decimal.
Was
Madison-
supplemental, but then I thought that we were making a divestment of $200 million from them actually this year. Are they experiencing any loss in FY17?
We are in the process of finalizing the number,
Okay.
and the timeline is very linked to the fact that the state's now involved, and so there's just a whole nother set of processes that we go through with the state that is not
Yeah.
entirely at our discretion. But we agree vocational programs get funded above WSF. Last year, it was in the amount of $2.2 million. We're finalizing the exact figure, and as we said, we should have it. If it's not next
Okay.
week, it will be within a matter
Well,
of
you
weeks.
sense a reoccurring theme, so I
Yeah,
think we'll all be
yeah.
vigilant in that line of questioning.
And do you guys want to answer the question on the
I would answer a couple pieces of that. First, projected enrollment for Madison Park next year is at 874. Of those, we have 33 low severity resource room students, 95 moderate severity resource room students, and 184 substantially separate students. That's a total of 312 projected special education students. That's roughly 35%. Madison Park has had a decrease in enrollment, which will result in a decrease in their overall funding level next year, though we are still finalizing the supplemental amount. And there's two parts to us funding the additional amount for vocational weight for vocational schools. The first is in the weighted student funding model at the bottom, you'll notice that there is a weight in the model for vocational. We've recognized over the last few years that that weight is not adequate for supporting all of the programs at Madison Park. So what we've been doing in close partnership with the new leadership team there is to understand each of the different vocational programs and what the student need is for that program. The class sizes and staffing for shop class is very different from cosmetology. So we're working at what their programming should be, what the model is for success for those students in those programs, and then coming up with a way to fund it for success after that. So that's why the process has been so delayed, is really working with the team to understand both the vision for Madison Park and also from our perspective, the nuts
So
and bolts.
we'll continue again to be vigilant in our advocacy. And again, just to be clear, out of 874 students, 312 of them are special education students.
Correct.
35%. Okay. Could you just speak to, any analysis that we might have sort of in looking back on school assignment, any patterns that have emerged based on children's addresses, where school populations are coming from? Is there any analysis that you have?
Sorry, do you mind being a little more specific in terms, are you talking about the new home-based assignment?
Correct.
Process? Yes.
And I know Counselor Jackson did have a hearing specifically on that, so if there's not something that you can quickly share, I'll circle back and continue with my line of questioning because I don't want to run out of time.
The academic team from MIT who helped design the home-based assignment recently put together some refreshed research for us. I'd be happy to share their detailed. If I remember correctly, the headlines of their report were that the implementation of home-based assignment for BPS was successful in achieving many of the goals that we had set forth, and they noted a slight increase in the equity of access to high-quality seats in BPS as a result of the new assignment process.
Okay. So
I'd be happy to send you their full report.
Yeah,
if you're
absolutely, because
interested.
that's really what I'm trying to get at is if, our intention, has been met. I think when this was implemented, we were supposed to have 9 choices for parents and at least 2 or 3 level 1 schools. And I just want to know, as we take a look back, have we seen that? Okay. Some of this I'll save for, actually, before I get to that, I do feel sometimes that there's language and jargon being used and maybe we're not all applying the same definition. So just through the chair, I just want to make a couple of requests because we're all trying to sort of copiously take down notes, but I don't want to miss anything. So for all of my colleagues, can we just get, if it's included in here, then refer me to the page, but I want to know what are the sustainability schools? And the slide you put up around school-based decisions, is that the same terminology for our autonomy schools? Okay, so we were trying to take that down, but I couldn't keep up. So I want the list of the autonomy schools. So the sustainability schools, the autonomy schools, and then also the soft landing schools.
Absolutely.
Okay,
We'd
and
be
then I
happy
would
to provide
also
that.
like the name of the 5 schools. It's only 5 right now. We're only meeting the capacity of about 800 students for the early learning centers, correct?
Yep.
So I'd like those 5 schools. And then just, this is sort of a bit of a Groundhog's Day, sort of repeating our line of questioning and commentary, myself and Counselor Campbell from the last hearing. And what she's referring to as strategy, I'll just say a shared value system about what will come out of Central. I support, autonomy, and I understand that, each school leader knows what is best for their school, but just from a value standpoint, there are some things that we all have to fundamentally agree. Like when we talk about social-emotional learning and wellness, this intense testing culture and this push for rigor and improved outcomes, we will never get there if we're not making the investments to ensure the emotional competency and resilience of our students to receive what is being offered. So it should not be, we have 124 5 schools and 115 school nurses. I don't know how we get there. It's not fair to anybody. I just want us to decide that we ascribe as a value that every student deserves to have a strong start and a strong finish. We make the investments necessary to achieve that, and that we all can agree that every school stands to benefit from social, emotional, and learning and wellness investments. I commend the superintendent for creating the first in the nation assistant superintendent of social, emotional learning and wellness. I work very closely with those folks. I love the vision. I love the paradigm and sort of cultural shift that's occurring here. But we have got to make the investments. It's more than an overarching strategy. It's a shared value, because with all the additional resources, if we are debating on how those dollars should be dedicated, it doesn't matter. I don't really want a headmaster to get to choose whether or not they should invest in social emotional learning and wellness, because we know the impact that it has had in improving academic outcomes. So what's the guiding values principle here, for BPS? So, that's more of a statement than anything. And to your point in terms of not reversing course and sort of looking at multi-year strategies, we care about FY17 and if we can reverse course, because that's what you're before this body asking for us to support. And we've got to decide whether or not we'll vote yes for this budget. So I think that's why we're grasping at straws, because, we're accountable, to these families. And we all share that accountability, but, it's just incredibly frustrating. Okay, so I'll ask for all those lists. And then also I want to just understand for a lot of emphasis on SPED as it relates to inclusion and our concerns about, with an increase in class size, how we'll reach those goals. But I'm also very concerned about our commitment to those students 14 to 22. And we were just starting to, get on pace with our inclusion goals. And so, to divest in that, I don't want us to lose sight of the other thing we have to work on, I think, which is transition. And so what will this impact be in ensuring an equitable transition for our students receiving special education services?
Sorry, one quick clarification. We are continuing to make a major investment in inclusion. So I don't know if
I don't think we're not. I'm just saying that I don't want us to lose, we're making progress there, but I don't want us to lose sight of what we need to be doing on transition.
Yes, and in fact, this year's budget proposes an additional $1 million in transition services.
Okay.
Which we're proud and excited about.
Okay, great. So we'll unpack some of that,
Yes.
further at future hearings. And I think that's the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questioning was going to be around assignments, which we have, I wanted to see the data on that. What is actually going on with the new home base? And Councilor Presley asked those questions. If I could have a copy of that report also. And I wanted to also ask about Madison Park, where Councilor Presley went. But as she was asking the questions, the chair of schools was chomping at the bit over there. So I wanted to defer to him for 1 minute to see where his question was before I continued with Madison. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. So Madison Park, they don't have their budget. Can you, and we explained a little bit, are we holding back because there's an actual going to be a plan in place? So when this budget is rolled out, will we have I hate to even use this term, but real vocational, that kids can come out of that school and be placed. I toured Ben Franklin 2 weeks ago, and before their classes are even done, there's people trying to raid those kids before they even graduate. Are we going to be in a place where we're training kids to go into Ben Franklin or even go in as first-year apprentices into all our labor unions that, quite frankly, their roles of Boston kids are a little bit low? Is that going to be part of this when that budget comes out? If you can answer that, please. Not having that budget here, is the reason for that being held back because the state is involved and they want to see us change our curriculum altogether? Is it going to be a total revamp over there?
The timing change is due to the state involvement.
Okay, and are they looking for a more beefed up vocational program? What is the state looking for?
The work at Madison Park has been a major focus of our high school redesign. I believe under the new leadership there, they are considering some major new investments and path forward. No, David, if you...
I think as a part of their turnaround planning process with the state, they're looking at all aspects of both their academic and vocational program. And I think specifically they're looking at breaking down the wall between those two programs and thinking about how the academic side of the house and the vocational side of the house work together to provide graduates who are ready to move on to. And
do they have to work together? Is it possible to, I mean, I guess, yes, you need some academics if you're going into the trades, but I don't know, I'm not sure I totally understand your answer there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can go back and try and get more detail from Dr. McCaskill, who's an expert on all this.
So if that school continues to not perform, what happens? If the state isn't happy, does the state take that school over?
Level 4.
We're just at the start of
the
this
beginning
process
part
of designating them as level 4. The state will set certain targets for their turnaround plan, and if they don't meet the targets, then there are a number of options that we'll need to address as a district.
And how far along? So you're right at the beginning of that. How long is that process?
There's a 3-year initial phase for turnaround,
where it's additional funding and those sorts of things.
That's correct, and the measurable annual goals that they'll be set for the school. We have seen in some of our schools exiting turnaround status at level 1. For other of our schools, they remain in turnaround status for 5 years. And then we've had a couple schools that have turned into receiver schools, level 5 schools.
And those goals are going to be, because it's our only vocational schools, will there be baseline will we set goals for academics and the vocational? Like one's not gonna be hurt. They both have to progress, correct?
This is our first vocational school in level 4 status. I can say that for the process of setting measurable annual goals, the state comes in and says you must have goals in these categories, primarily academic. And then the community groups, there's a lot of engagement with our stakeholder community to identify what their goals are for the school. And I think at that point we might set vocational goals. But the state's primary target for level 4 is academic performance, not vocational performance.
Okay, that concerns me. Can we talk about the 8 schools that are losing their funding? Again, plain and simple, why are they losing their funding? It was the Perry, the
losing their funding.
The Perry, the Clap, the Winship, all those 8 schools. Why are they losing funding again?
Each of those schools has a little bit different situation that they're in. Not all of them are losing funding necessarily, as Councilor Sabi George mentioned. The Perrys have been in a difficult situation for 2 years in a row. Not that they're losing funding, but that they've got a model that's not sustainable with their current enrollment. Meaning they don't.
So their enrollment is less than what it should be.
Less than financially viable for their school.
And so the district provides additional money to them in order for them to maintain services.
And so more students wouldn't fill that gap?
More students would fill that gap. If more students wanted to attend the Perry and were enrolled in the Perry, then they might not be in the same situation.
And is that across the board why all 8 schools are in that same boat?
By
So
and
low
large,
enrollment?
low enrollment, or in some cases, I know the Philbrick is one of our small schools in Roslindale. They have a challenge with low incidence of ELL students. It's very expensive for them to provide their ELL services because they have so few ELL students, which makes them, that's causing them financial problems.
And is some of that because like I know the clap is just to the 5th grade, and there's a drop off in the 5th grade. Is that where their low enrollment is? In the clap.
In the clap. David's going to look that up, and we can provide the information on that.
Okay. You can give that to me when you're ready. I'm okay, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I just to follow up on that, the schools that you ticked off, the 8, the Perry, Philbrick, Bradley, Kennedy, Grew, Winship, Allegheny, Clapp, are those all small schools? And when I say small, like under 100 to a couple of hundred kids, is that the challenge with the weighted student formula at a small school setting?
That is one of the challenges. I think whenever we see a school with a particular classroom that is below the break-even point, that 87%, if you're in a bigger school and you have some classrooms that are under and some classrooms that are over, you can sort of balance out. At the smaller schools, it only takes 1 or 2 classrooms to be below that standard before they are in a situation where they need a sustainability allocation.
Right.
And I might add to that we don't consider that necessarily a challenge of weighted student funding, but rather weighted student funding shines a light on some of the challenges that we have in effectively serving kids at those schools. And I will also just point to the many, many benefits of weighted student funding when in Boston, like other districts across the country, when you looked before we had weighted student funding, we had uneven allocation of resources for myriad reasons of legacy programs and how principals might advocate for their kids and their programs. Now we have a system where it's really clear why every dollar goes to every school, and it shines a spotlight on it. And we can all sit here and debate if we're doing it for the right reasons and it's the right amount of money, but having a formulaic approach is what makes that conversation possible.
I just want to let the chairman of education chime in on the level.
Thank you. Thank you. That the schools that you mentioned that are getting soft landings are in general great schools. And so the Philbrick is a level 1, the Bradley is a level 2, the PJ Kennedy is a level 1, the Grew is a level 4 and is in turnaround. The Winship is a level 3. The Allegheny Montessori model is a great school, and at that level we don't actually do levels. And the Clapp is a level 1. And so I think the other component that can be gleaned from this is that that small school model is one of the most beneficial and successful models that you actually have in your portfolio. So I would hope that you would look back at that and understand the investment that you have here. And we need to stop just looking at things based on how much money we put into it. What are the outcomes? So if you have great outcomes, do we take money away and say, hey, you know what? Equality means, or equity means taking money away and making all of them a race to the bottom versus saying, let's bring everybody up and sustain them. But I do want to defer to parents, Mr. Chair.
I have Councilor Flaherty.
Just working? There we go. You can start at early education cuts. In total, it was 1.3 million cut from 5 early learning centers, and getting a significant number of calls from the West Zone ELC in Jamaica Plain. They were cut $477,000. That's 25% of their budget, which I'm not quite sure that's equitable compared to the other cuts, but they're asking for some restoration to preserve the small class size as well as their extended day program. Otherwise, it'll be a 20-to-1 student-teacher ratio. So it seems as though that cut was a little heavier towards the West Zone ELC to the tune of 477. And I'm just going to ask that you guys take a look at that formula and and see how it pairs with the remaining 4 early learning centers
Sure.
if you're looking at making cuts.
And if I could on that, that was the original proposed reduction across each of the ELCs and EECs. The final number in terms of reductions was 874K, with a roughly 370K reduction at the West Zone ELC. So it did come down. Our process on that, once we announced the reduction, we then worked with the school leaders to identify their model and how they were serving kids, and then tried to make sure that we were able to maintain quality while still making reductions in staffing at those sites, which is why you see a change from the original number to the final number.
So the final number is 370 as opposed to the 477, so the 70 was restored to help facilitate
That's
that
right,
small class
to help
size.
facilitate the continued program. And while it is a larger cut overall, we do think that this is a move towards greater equity. The West Zone EEC supplemental was almost 10,000 per pupil. Other schools who are receiving the EEC supplemental were receiving closer to 2,400 per pupil. So pretty significant disparity in terms of equity just among those schools. And for us to roll out the EEC program across all of our schools would cost us something like $50 million. So this is an issue of equity when we look across all of our schools.
And if the West Zone ELC, if that's the model, if that's the one that's working the best, then I would assume that we're talking about replicating that throughout the 4 other early learning centers.
Part of the great part of this conversation, when we got all of the early learning centers together, to be able to talk about their model and what works, what were the unique situations that we see at each of the schools, and that went down to where the placement of the bathroom was, to how they support the students and support education throughout the extended time. Part of our goal is to be able to provide more extended learning time opportunities throughout the district, particularly for early childhood. And so in an interest of making this scalable, we needed to figure out a model that could work both financially and academically.
Shifting to the Perry, I led the effort on the council to move the Perry from a K-5 to a K-8 at a time when the previous administration did not want to move in the K-8 direction. And I think that the formula, or at least some of the cuts that are being considered at the Perry, are being you're using sort of a K-5 model. And I'll give you the case in point is the lunch monitor, for example. The lunch monitor actually watches a student's K-8, and the cut was based on K-5. The cut was based on, they're excluding about 90 students. And so nowhere in the contract is it mentioned that they're based on a sort of K-5 model when it's a K-8. So when you're looking at the cuts, quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Perry's considered a K-5 over at Court Street or now over at the bowling building. But the fact of the matter is it's a K-8. It's been a K-8 for some time now. And it needs to be viewed as a K-8, not a K-5. So cuts need to be considered in that direction. And I give an example of there's 259 students there, and I'll go with you there tomorrow morning if you want. There's about I think 12 to 15 buses that service that school, and the buses that pull up have on average 3 to 4 students, and some of the buses have 1 to 2 students. That is a colossal waste of resources, a colossal waste of resources. So if we're looking to identify cost-saving measures, you go to the Perry School, you treat it like a K-8, but you sit there and you observe the vehicles that pull up every morning that let 3 or 4 kids off. Most of the buses, some of them let off only 1 or 2 kids. That has to change. That right there is a significant cost savings that you could direct either back to the K-8. You can definitely save the lunch monitor, but you could probably talk about other positive academic improvements within the K-8. So if you want to meet me there tomorrow morning, I'm happy to do that. But these buses pull up every day. I know because they go right by my house. And there's 3 or 4 students per bus on average, and some are 1 to 2. That's lunacy. So when someone wants to tackle that issue, there's a real cost savings associated with that. The Arabic program at Boston Latin Academy, apparently I'm being told, is now out. We're in a global economy. If there's one area where we would be deficient, it would be in that. And we get kids that are willing to learn Arabic. It's over at Boston Latin Academy. I would suggest that that be restored. The Diploma Plus program at Charlestown High, I know Councilor Sabi, George, and I were invited over not too long ago. I'm being told that the program is being saved by private funding. I think it may be from Liberty Mutual. So I'd like to kind of identify what the terms of that, private funding is. and why we couldn't keep the Diploma Plus program. They're doing some remarkable things over there, particularly with older age students, and that's sort of that's that vulnerable population that if we're not doing our best to educate them, those are the ones that more often are going to find themselves getting into trouble and causing some problems in our community. So if you can maybe just touch on the Diploma Plus program over at Charlestown High, and then I'll defer the remaining questions to the human capital side.
Can I just make one comment on the transportation?
Sure.
We agree. And we have asked our transportation department this year to come up with $10 million of efficiency. It's a big number.
Mm-hmm.
And the focus for this year will be on operational improvement, not changes to service or policy for school choice.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to tackle both as an organization, the operational efficiency, and I think we need to have conversations about policy.
Mm-hmm.
But when we get more efficient and we can be confident in saying we're being as efficient as we can be with every single transportation dollar, we will still be left with buses that aren't full because of our school choice policies.
Well, I mean, and so as a BPS parent, my children attended both the Perry and the Murphy school. I can tell you that, and Councilor Asabi George can confirm, is that as a parent, you get the option for transportation, and then we would send back that we didn't need the transportation, or we chose to carpool or to drive our kids to school. But believe it or not, my kids had a seat on that bus for the entire year. That's a function of just operation and logistics, right?
Agreed.
The same can be applied for when my children would go to school. There would be 3, 4, 5 empty seats in their classroom, and there was a specific period of time where it would have to go by before the teacher could actually notify the principal that there's excess seats. Then they would have to notify, at the time, Court Street, which would then have to notify the East Zone. I'm in the East Zone. And then they would pick off the wait list. Weeks would go by. Mm-hmm. Weeks would go by when a child somewhere could be in a classroom learning math, English, science, et cetera. So how that functions, again, that's from an operation standpoint.
We agree. And the transportation data system that Nate referred to earlier is specifically targeted at making sure we know who are the children who are on our buses. It should have benefits not only operationally and financially, but for safety and for parents.
Right.
We are launching it, I think, in a week or two. And parents are going to be able to get a text message every time their kid gets on and off the bus. You'll know if the bus is running late. We are optimistic that these are the kind of very focused, selective investments that we want to pursue, even in tough fiscal times, which will set us up for being in a better place in the future.
But the concept of excess seats on buses or excess seats in classrooms falls into the abyss year after year after year after year. So that's Councilor Asabi's first budget. It's not my first rodeo. We've been here with the school department recognizing that children have the option to take transportation. If they check the box and they select that they do, there's a seat. If the parents check the box that they do not wish, that seat should now be taken out and that bus consolidated from a big bus to a small bus, or it should then in turn, you should be able to get on the computer and reroute the buttons, and that the pickup route changes slightly to account for pickup and drop off in the times. But to have bus after bus after bus after bus pull up to a school with 3 or 4 kids, that's very valuable and precious resources that are just going out the door. We have a full-length bus with 3 or 4 kids on it is absolute lunacy. And then we're talking about cutting all this other stuff, early learning centers, after-school programs, lunch monitor. All of those could be staved off if we would just get our hands around the colossal waste around and efficiency, to identify efficiencies in the school transportation, but also in the seats, the excess seats in the classroom. Why in God's name it takes weeks, if not months, to finally deem a seat available in a classroom in 2016, it's asinine. So that's my opining, Mr. Chair.
Could I just ask for a clarification on that too? Because that's a major frustration for many parents who are on wait lists. But is there a policy or some kind of statutory obligation for the school department not to give away a seat until sometime after the school year starts, even if they don't hear from. I know that, you know, in hearings in the past, school department hearings, we ask the school department to call people, are your children coming? Are your children coming? And sometimes they just don't get an answer, yes or no. Is there an obligation to keep that seat for a child that was assigned to a seat for a certain time after the school year starts? Because that's basically what I've been told before.
And just follow that through, Chairman. And on the flip side of that, there's also kids, students that are home in September that don't have an assignment, which is also a disgrace. So the pendulum is on both sides. We're holding a seat for someone that's not going to that school for the sake of whether it's a statutory and/or we're waiting to identify whether or not the child has an illness or there's something that's prohibiting that child to go to school. And then on the flip side of that, we actually have children in the Boston Public School system that are unassigned and that are home in September and almost in the beginning of October. Then the phone rings, oh yeah, we have a seat for you at the Perry School. You start tomorrow. That kid's been sitting home for a month, unassigned. So it goes both ways through the chairman's point, and that has to stop.
So yes, I would say that there's a lot of efficiencies for us to gain, and I think there's a lot of effort working with our Office of Engagement, who runs our welcome centers, working on better streamlining our assignment process so that we don't have students waiting for placement when there's available seats. That is an incredibly frustrating thing to see. We do have an obligation. Students cannot be unenrolled from a school until they have 8 consecutive days of not attending, and then they go through the does not report process by which they're cleared from a school's assignment. Right. We have evaluated a number of different ways to anticipate some of this. I know that I can remember in the fall of freshman year in college, they will oversubscribe in the anticipation that either not everyone shows up or then some students leave. It's difficult for us to anticipate students not showing up, and it's a difficult thing for us to bank on our students not showing up in the fall. There's something that I think is very different than the way universities can approach this. But so we need to do a better job, I think, of getting the students who are assigned to a school to come to our schools in the fall, and then anticipating. The other thing is with the new student assignment plan, our traditional enrollment patterns were changed at a number of our schools. We were assigning kids to schools where they had never had as a choice set. My easiest example for me to use is the MATA hunt for people living in Roslindale. That was not an option because it crossed over the assignment lines for people who live, say, in my neighborhood. And so when we started assigning students from this area to the MATA hunt, we wanted to see what the attrition patterns were, what the take-up rate was. We're in the second year, we're getting better data, and we can do better prediction of assignment patterns in that way. That's not meant to be an excuse for why we don't do it better, but it's just when you have a shift of underlying data after having a assignment system in place for many, many years, we just have to be cautious. Because the alternative is we assign a whole bunch of students to the school, and then the classroom becomes oversubscribed, and you have 25 K1 students or 25 kindergarten students in a classroom. I think we'd have a lot of angry teachers in those scenarios.
And I think there's an added cost that the teacher actually makes more money if you're oversubscribed too, so that throws budgets off as well. But so just to clarify, 8 days straight, no attendance. From that point forward, though, to Councilor Flaherty's point, sometimes it's like 3 weeks to a month before that seat will be filled. Can we do a better job of monitoring those the 8 days and then get someone in there as quickly as possible?
Yes, I think we can do a better job.
Before I go around again, if my colleagues don't mind, there's some parents that would like to testify at this point, if that's okay. So let me call down Kenny Jervis, Kate Gleason, and Tanya Tedesco.
Very good.
Good afternoon. My name is Kenny Jervis. I'm a parent at the Roger Clapp Innovation School and Boston Latin School. And normally I don't testify regarding my own children's school. I've usually advocated for equity in this throughout the whole city and improvements throughout the whole city. But today I've heard a lot of testimony that has affected the Clapp School. 6 years ago, as you may know, I contacted many of you and people around the city to help save the Roger Clapp School as it was slated for closure. At that time, we identified why we were deemed a low-performance school, and that was due to AWC. We were losing over 50% of our students at the 4th grade level. And then without a 6th grade or a pathway, we were losing another good percentage to charter schools in the neighborhood that offered that 6th grade pathway and that continuation of education. I, for 3 years, visited many of you, visited with Carlton Jones, had many meetings with Superintendent Johnson, her team, and then with John McDonough about the necessity to add a 6th grade to give our community the pathway it needed and to give families that option. This is why in the innovation plan that I helped to co-write, in fact, I'm the only one left in the city that's still involved with the Clapp on that innovation plan. We identified the need for that 6th grade. We identified, and we were actually told, give us time, become a higher level and you will get that 6th grade. 2 years into our innovation plan, Boston Public Schools designated us an inclusion school and added 2 inclusion level schools on the earlier levels, taking away our art and science room. And then last year added another inclusion classroom. Next year we'll be adding another 1st grade classroom. So we've gone, and in this process, our 5-year plan has run out. And because the district and the teachers union agreed to a higher level of pay for regular ELT, the teachers voted out the innovation plan because they were making less money for the extended learning time than what the rest of the city was being offered. So we've lost our innovation status. I was trying to say that our 4th and 5th grade classes took on an AWC-like curriculum with teachers, the 4th grade teacher being an English specialist and the 5th grade teacher being a math and science specialist, and students switched classrooms to get the higher level education. So, I mean, you guys have set us up to fail, and now you've added all these different versions. You've taken away our art and science room. Our art and science is done on carts. You're literally setting us up to fail to say we need a sustainability. No, you guys need a sustainability because you guys have set up programs that you cannot fund because you just thrown them there when you have other areas of the and the other thing, when 6 years ago when the Clapp became Innovation School, we had a percentage of 60% to 40% walkers to bus students. We're down to about 30% walkers and up to 70% bus students. So you talk about we need to cut down on buses, but yet you set up our school to require more transportation. And, I'm sorry, but it's not working. And if you go to close my school, even though I won't be there next year, I will still organize. And I have all the documents of the no's and the promises that were made. And this is on you guys. And today I heard many questions not be able to answer when 2 of the people on the budget team had these answers when they were working for private companies, but all of a sudden can't answer these questions when they work for the city. Thank you.
Katie?
Is this on?
It's
Okay.
on now.
My name is Kate Gleason, and my son is in his second year at the West Zone Early Learning Center. I'm here as a parent and as a representative of the Parent Council. The families of the West Zone Early Learning Center would like you to hear our story and to help us find answers to our questions that have risen during the recent budget cut process. We are very grateful for the opportunities our children have had as students of the West Zone Early Learning Center. Not only has their first school experience been a nurturing and academically enriched experience due to the highly qualified early education professionals and programming, but they have also had access to extended learning time, what the ELCs call surround care, in which paraprofessionals overlap with the morning teachers and continue expanding on the lead teacher's class themes and building the students' skills during the afternoon hours. Having seen the amazing benefits to our young children, the families of the West Zone Early Learning Center have cheered the City of Boston's initiatives to expand early learning opportunities to more families across the city and to expand extended learning time into more schools. The 5 ELCs have been the district's incubator for programs that provide high-quality early learning, and we want to see these successes available to all families. However, despite the city's calls to focus on early education and to expand extended learning time, the West Zone Early Learning Center, like all schools in the district, has to make staffing and programming cuts because the city is underfunding the BPS budget. The West Zone Early Learning Center received a $477,000 cut this year, almost $500,000, and a quarter of the school's overall budget. While we are disappointed this cut leaves our children without valuable programming, such as reading recovery and music classes, we are alarmed to know that if a paraprofessional is absent in the afternoon, classes will be doubled up. So children will be grouped in 30 to 40 students. These are young general education and special education students with 1 staff member. This diminishes the quality of the extended learning time and puts even into jeopardy our young students' safety. We ask you to have the city reinstate $70,000 to the West Zone Early Learning Center budget to allow 2 paraprofessionals to be hired to reduce student-to-staff ratios and provide coverage in the event of illness. In addition, we need your help in finding answers to the city's plans. We see what is happening despite the success of our school and despite the initiatives being promoted. And we want to know what the city intends to do to increase opportunities for more early education programming, how the 5 ELCs fit into this plan, and what the city plans to do with the ELC's extended learning time in the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Am I on?
Now you
Okay. I am Tanya Tedesco. I live in West Roxbury. I have a 9th grader at Boston Arts Academy. I have a few points that I want to address to you guys and then a few for you guys. The first thing is I've had a number of parents, lots of parents actually, ask if I can ask you guys to possibly reschedule any of the afternoon meetings that are coming up into the evening, because there are more parents than those of us that are able to get here in the middle of the day that do want to come in and testify on behalf of what's going on. So just putting that out there, if that could happen, maybe the one that's in like 2 weeks. I think there's an afternoon one. I don't have my phone, so I don't know. I want to address a component of the equity that keeps coming up. In terms of this weighted student funding, and you guys address this, and I feel like you guys attack it as like a grad school problem and not actual human impact problem. It's not really equitable, and that's come up a few times, but on the ground, BLS, which is a great school, but it does not represent the demographics. They have a very low percentage comparatively. They're getting about $95,000 in cuts, which per student, basically, my math is rough because I don't know exact student count, but it's about $31 a kid that's impacting. My daughter's school, which has a much higher percentage of kids with special needs, They are getting $187,000 in cuts, which equates to approximately $435 per kid, which that's not equitable. That's insane, in part because more of the kids at Latin come from more affluent families, so their families can support outside their kids' needs. That is not the case at my daughter's school. It is not the case at a lot of our schools. So it's really not equitable. I also want to follow what Councilor Campbell said. If you guys can't change this and you guys can't change this, then what is the point? Who can fix this funding problem? If it is Mayor Walsh, then maybe instead of coming and sitting here, I need to go sit outside his office. But I need some guidance, because if they can't change it and you guys can't change it and he's not going to change it, are we just throwing up our hands and saying, well, let's talk about it. Let's have some more hearings and meetings, which you guys seem to be very big fans of, and not really do anything. It is extraordinarily frustrating as a taxpayer in this city, as a resident in this city, as a parent of one student in this district, and my son may or may not end up in the district. It is super frustrating. And I feel, after having gotten the McKinsey report, and I've only gotten through about 40 pages of it, that you guys have been going off that report for this whole year has been a play on that report, which the underlying analytics of that report are so misleading and mind-boggling that they are calculating classroom space or class size on square footage of a building. I mean, seriously, hallways. I have not been into a school that has 50%. When your slide went up, I thought my head was going to go off, because I would like to see documentation of what classrooms have 50% off. But when you put that slide up, people take that piece of information as fact, even though you cannot back it up. And that, in the McKinsey report, they put a lot of flashy headlines. Boston spends a disproportionate amount of money on education. And then in a footnote, but not when factoring in the Northeast, not when factoring in Massachusetts funding, not. But the flashy headline that's getting everyone's attention is that Boston overspends. You guys need to figure out your information, because coming here week after week without information for these guys, without information for us, is unacceptable. I told Dr. Chang this last week. It's absurd.
Thank you. Thank you. You want to take over? Now we're just going to start the second round. Councilor Jackson. A recess? Is it?
So I just wanted to hit on the librarian component. I think that is a very good offering to move to the central side of things, because it is absolutely fundamental to the accreditation process, as Councilor Sabi George noted. In addition, they're some of the only people who are actually doing asset management in the school system. So one of the things that we both heard was books. So books are being ordered over and over again, and they are being sent to schools year after year when they don't actually need them, right? And so if there's no one there on the librarian side, that actually will continue to happen. I hope that you hear the parents who are saying, hey guys, this is working for us. It's working for us. It's working for our young people. And your data actually shows that the early learning centers actually work. And what it states to me around the issue relative to the cost that you have to put there is that there's a base level of cost regardless of how many students that you put in the building. That's what we should surmise from the actual cost. But the outcomes are achievement gap closing outcomes. And so why would we change the actual data that you have around outcomes, dilute that as we expand? That doesn't make sense. Why would we go from something that we know that works, you've proven that works, that you invested in, and just squander that investment as we try to expand? And I guess overarching, most of the stuff that we've heard today is that this is the only place that we pretend that we can do more with less. Our young people are inherently caught in the achievement gap. They have many more obstacles than other districts around us, and they need more investment. And so that is not only to you, but it's also directly to the mayor's office, who gave you this inadequate budget. $13.5 million makes you make poor decisions or bad decisions amongst horrible ones. And so in terms of what's happening here, as Councilor Campbell noted, I don't necessarily blame you for doing what you have to do with what's here, but this isn't inadequate, and it does not support our young people, and also doesn't support your status as the second highest ranked large public school system in the United States. If you continue to disinvest, you will lose that. And by the way, our young people, they don't have another year for us to get it together. They don't have more time for us to figure out the 2-year time frame or whatever. That's 2 years of their life, 2 years of their learning that they're going backwards in. So I would just simply say, Mr. Chair, that this, again, we see from the weighted student formula, what we came back this year, and the reason why there are cuts in the special education budget is because there was no other place to cut. Last year, the last 3 or 4 years, we've cut so much out of everything. The reason why we're cutting autistic students, the reason why we're cutting trauma students is because that's literally the only place that we actually had money. And so we're cutting now to the bone. The outcome will be real. As you heard one of the parents from the West Zone ELC, this is not only, and so folks should know and put on the table, the ELCs actually give instruction from 7:30 to 4:30. Not only, they're not babysitting, they're actually giving instruction from 7:30 to 4:30. And the data shows that poor Black and Latino kids actually do better than white kids in private placement. Right? So y'all are beating private schools. And so with that said, why would we throw the car either in neutral or reverse? We have to move forward. And the only way that we close the achievement gap, and then we don't have to have the police come here and say they have however much overtime, right? Which is going to be the case, 8-10 years down the road if we don't do right by these young people. So I would just note that the cuts to the special ed are unconscionable. In addition, I do want to note on the enrollment side, the Perry, you guys need to fix that the water. People can't walk on water, and you guys definitely don't have the budget for that, right? So the Perry actually is hurt by how the enrollment works, right? So they're not there, and there are people who came to our meeting, Councilor Sabia, George and I's meeting, and they wanted to go to that school, but they're not actually able to enroll in that school. And we still haven't figured out, so you said that Madison has a specific number of students allocated to it next year. Is that number based on all of the students who said that they wanted to go there?
It's based on the number of students currently attending.
Okay. So the issue is the school department artificially limits specific schools and does not allow them to grow based on the actual demand there. We will have another hearing on the enrollment component, because that is actually what was told to us during the EAC process. But again, this is so frustrating because you hear parents saying, I want to stay. And I'll just close. When we speak about school choice, those parents up there are choosing to invest in us, and they're giving us the best chance they possibly can give, and the most valuable thing that they have, which is their children. And we have to do right by their children, and this budget doesn't do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know we have something coming up. So.
Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Kenny, Kate, and Tanya for their continued fight for education and better education through BPS. I really appreciate all your efforts. Many of the meetings that we've had, listening sessions, they always chime in with great information, and their heart's in the right place, and I really appreciate that. You know, I know transportation's coming up. So, you know, I think this is my third budget, and I've hammered transportation 3 years in a row. And so you can give whoever a heads up, it's coming again. You know, it was touched on lightly before. But, you know, I know we're cutting $10 million from transportation. That's not enough. We haven't thought outside the box. And I look at other commissioners and directors in the city of Boston who've been asked to do more with less. I look at the transportation department and Commissioner Fiandaca, Commissioner Cook over in the Parks Department. And I really believe these people don't sleep well at night because they're asked to do more with less. And they're really sleepless nights trying to figure out how to make sure our parks are ready for our kids to play. Our soccer fields are ready. Our transportation departments work, whatever the department they are. And then I get to BPS transportation, and I just don't see it. And Council Flaherty hopped on a little bit with the 2 and 3, and I understand that, you know, what your answer to us is there's different times that kids go to school, and honestly, I just don't buy it. And both years I've been here, and I'll ask the question again to transportation, is why aren't we thinking outside the box, like 15-passenger vans or minivans? Why do we have to have 50-passenger buses rolling through the city at 4 miles a gallon of diesel fuel, poisoning our atmosphere, clogging up our streets? And we could have minivans, for Pete's sake. In reality, we could have minivans. That question wasn't answered last transportation hearing, and hopefully you can bring that back and have them get ready for it, because I'm not buying the whole, you know, well, it's a federal regulation that we have to have a 50-passenger bus. And everybody who lives in Boston, I'll talk about District 5 in particular, we have 360 buses in Reeville, my hometown, which is awful. I don't like them there. I don't want them there. And it's not a NIMBY thing. I don't think anybody wants them there. But when I go for my morning runs, I run to the cemetery because I don't have to smell the diesel fumes. They don't cut through the cemetery, which is generally the only place they don't cut through. I'm going off on transportation. I don't mean to. I'm going to bring it on transportation later on, but it just fires me up that I see buses parked all over the place. They're parked in lots, bus drivers sleeping. I don't even know what they're doing, and there's no good answer to where all these buses are driving and where they're going and who they're taking. I just don't get it. I think it's an awful system. You know, we've heard the term unsustainable model several times, and now the Philbrook. So as Councilor George had stated, several of the schools are in East Boston. Well, 2 of them are in Hyde Park, Rosendale, in District 5, the Philbrook and the GRU. And I visited both schools many times. And the Philbrook is a small school, but they're an awesome school. And they have a reading program there where kids are getting there in the ELL. They're 1 and 2 years behind before they get into this reading program. And yeah, it's 101. But by the time the school year is over, they're not only even, some of them are ahead, some of them are 2 years ahead in their reading level. So to say it's an unsustainable model, even though it works, makes no sense to me. So if it's an unsustainable model that doesn't work, let her rip, cut it. But if it's an unsustainable model that works, where our children are getting great educations, then you have to figure it out. That's when the sleepless nights come in, where you have to try to figure it out. And then my last thing, there was a comment, and I was like shuffling through papers, and did I hear that an MIT person designed this student assignment process?
We had a. Do you want to talk that one?
Sure. Yeah, when we went through the very public process on redoing our student assignment plan, part of the process was making our data available online for the public to see, and the final proposal that was adopted actually came from the public. It was a PhD student at MIT who designed the new choice system that was ultimately adopted by the external advisory committee. So yes, it was an MIT team that put together the final student assignment plan.
And I can imagine at first blush that causes some concerns, but I think as Nate explained, it was actually a reason for celebration. The process was so transparent and open. BPS started off with proposals of its own, but posted every shred of data to see good ideas could come from any corner. So that's where we landed.
Well, it doesn't really work. So we have to get back onto it, because I've had 2 parents just in the last couple of weeks call me and they're moving. And I mentioned it in the first meeting. You know, a woman that I've been friends with for years and years, her husband's an EMS paramedic, gone. They're going. You know why? Because they can see the Roosevelt out their front window, but they got their 5th choice and they're being bused to Dorchester. I have friends and want to go to Roosevelt Lower School, the old Hemingway school where I went. He could throw a paper airplane out of his backyard and it could float into the tot lot at the Hemingway. 6th choice, getting shipped out. He's battling with his wife. He's from High Park. His wife's from Longmeadow, and she wants to go back to Longmeadow. What a shame. Thanks.
I just want to clarify one thing, because I have similar issues. I think we all, especially the district city councilors, have those issues where we get the call and they're either 30th on the waiting list. I would ask all my colleagues to look at enrollment information for all of their schools in their districts, especially as I did. And what I've seen is somewhat encouraging. I don't know the circumstances of every child being assigned, but what I'm seeing is 02134 and 02135 as almost 90% of the kids going to the Winship School in grades K1, K2, and K1, K2, because it's only been in existence 2 years, whereas prior to those 2 years, it was 50% at most. And I'm not saying that to defend the system or anything. I'm just saying I see what it was before. And what I think is happening is more parents in our districts are choosing the schools in the districts, the public schools, and we just don't have enough seats right now. And I wanted to commend the school department because they added a K1 class to the Baldwin and a K1 class to the Winship, which doesn't go far enough to addressing the total need. But my assumption is that when I see 80 to 90% Alston-Brighton kids going to Alston-Brighton schools, eventually I think, and we heard this through the assignment program, that transportation costs may go up initially until the assignment program is fully flushed out, sibling preference is gone, all the different logistical things that cause transportation costs to go up will go away when kids are going to school within the walk zone. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm just encouraged as someone who's looking at the Gardner numbers, the Winship, the Baldwin, and those numbers, and seeing predominantly Alston-Brighton families getting those seats right now. I just wanted to say that.
That's just not the situation at High Park, though.
Right, yeah. Counselor, I'm sorry, Anissa Sabi-George.
Thank you very much. A little bit ago, we were talking about the enrollment process. And one of the, and I've seen this firsthand, both in the school I've worked in and the school that my kids attend, one of the greatest challenges with that enrollment process and this gap is that lag between when a seat is vacated and when the enrollment office downtown sort of gets that word, contacts families. Schools know, for the most part, especially our smaller, lower grade schools, when kids are not going to return to that school in September, when kids aren't going to return after Christmas break, when kids are planning a move. Our schools know so much of that information, but we're not giving them the tools to be proactive. So if I know as a classroom teacher that I'm going to lose a kid at winter break, I'm going to notify I may notify the school principal and say, let's be proactive about making sure we have a kid ready to show up the day after we get back from school vacation. And let's start reaching out to the next 2 or 3 families on that wait list so they come and take a tour. And so that they can start school right away so we don't have this loss and we don't have this seat empty for a long period of time. I think that the do not report lists are sometimes used as tools as well. And I think that we can be much more proactive in fixing that. And in general, again, as a teacher, as a parent, now as an elected official, one of the biggest problems I see in BPS is in that enrollment office and in that process. And I'm also concerned, I think Councilor Jackson referred to it, this enrollment cap system that we're placing on schools that suppresses the amount of kids that can actually attend. Are we doing that to push kids into other schools? Why do we have some of those? I think that they're arbitrary caps on enrollment.
The ones that I'm aware of are, I don't think, arbitrary. I think we have certain situations where we have schools with physical space constraints. Actually, the Perry is one of them, where we can't assign them up to the assignable limit for what our contract class size is. because the physical space is not appropriate for students in that grade level. I know that exists at a few of our schools. There's also cases with some of our autonomous schools where they have some discretion over how many students they want to admit. Two examples, one an autonomous school, one not. For Boston Arts Academy, they run a separate admissions process where they evaluate students and their portfolios and a number of different criteria for appropriateness for arts education. In any given year, they have a lot of influence over how many students they're going to admit. In those cases, it needs to be a good partnership with the enrollment office over, okay, I'm going to take this many students, this is how many you need to assign to me. Where that conversation breaks down or where it's not revisited in a transparent and explicit way every year is where we have schools being capped based on information that may be outdated. I don't know of specific instances where that's happened, but I know that we want to bring a lot more transparency to that part of the assignment process. So what you can expect to see next year is an explicit review of the assignment constraints with schools so that they see we cap your enrollment at this grade for this reason, and the schools sign off on it so that they understand it. And so we have, the Perry, if I continue to use that example, we would go to the parent and say, we think that your 7th grade needs to be capped at 25 students, not 28. Is that correct? They agree that it's correct, and then we do assignment in that way. So that a lot of this information that's either people feeling like they must be capped because they have parents saying, I want to go there, but then they don't actually see the parent show up, or where the caps do exist because it's an outdated or it's not something that's been refreshed appropriately recently.
Thank you. So I have a question on the strategy line or category in our central office budget.
Mm-hmm.
That's page 33. We're increasing that by 10 full-time equivalents, which is a 25% increase. Can you just walk me through what the process or what this strategy line will be doing, what that money is for?
Under Superintendent Chang, BPS has undergone a significant reorganization that's led to a variety of changes in budgets for central departments. Some of the departments where you see FTE shifts, they're not representing an investment in those. It's more a reorganization of how we're going to work as an organization. The strategy department or division under Donna Muncy, Deputy Superintendent Donna Muncy, is a new organization for this year and will include. So
it's not new money?
It's not.
It's a shift in personnel? It's
primarily a shift in personnel.
Okay. We can stop there because I want to make sure that I ask my question about nurses. What's the standard allocation for nurses in BPS?
I know that the nurses are, I think I mentioned this at the last hearing, that they're allocated based on population and acuity. I don't know the exact formula. I can reach out to Maureen Stark and get that information.
And then are nurses centrally funded, or are they centrally staffed or school-based?
They're school-based and they're in school budgets, but they're allocated outside of weighted student funding. So when you see a school, if you go to the allocation tracker, you'll see each school and how much money they receive through weighted student funding. There's a separate column that shows the nurse allocation, both in terms of FTE and then the dollar amounts that are associated with that FTE. They're allocated the same way that our coordinators of special education services are allocated, both outside of weighted student funding. So they're centrally funded, but they'll be represented in the school's budget.
I do, and I understand that school populations affect whether or not they get a full-time nurse, a part-time nurse, less than part-time, a half-time nurse. But again, similar to my comments around the libraries, I think that it's really important that our schools have a nurse in the building full-time at each of our schools, regardless of size. And then my last request for you, and sort of in my excitement over the library questions, I failed to just ask for a summary, if we could have, about all of our library resources across the system, across BPS, in particular to space, staff, adequate collections, and other resources that they provide our schools in our system. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Presley.
Thoughtful and comprehensive questioning, and our parents You know, we often hear about the need to do a better job at engaging parents, and people talk about parent apathy, but I think it really is fatigue. You know, I mean, this is exhausting. And so I do just want to thank Kenny and Kate and Tanya and all the other parents. And I want to thank Eleanor, Nate, and David as well for being here and doing your best, you know, to answer these questions today. I just have a couple of quick questions. And again, if you can't give me an answer, you know, tell me when you can or get it to the appropriate people. So I wanted to just revisit my request from the last hearing relative to how many services you're contracting. And again, if those are contracted to Boston residents, and then how many of those are M and WBE. Because certainly when we're scrambling for resources and revenue, we do want to make sure that we're supporting local and prioritizing our residents in that. I would hate for those dollars to be going to other folks. Also, could you tell me where we are? Have we hired a new food services director? As you know, I've been working for some 3+ years in partnership with parent advocates and BPS to improve the quality of school food. And certainly want to make sure that in doing that we're supporting our food service workers in their professional development and you know, a shift in that department. It's been a search for a while now. So are we close? Have we hired someone?
I believe they're very close. And an offer has been made, but I don't know. It hasn't been finalized and announced yet.
Okay. Well, you know, again, we'll continue to be vigilant in that way because, you know, it's hard to chart a direction without a leader. And it's been, I think, demoralizing and very tough. So as focused as we are on improving the quality of school food and making sure that we're providing safe and equitable access to water, I don't want to forget about our beloved lunchmen and ladies and the role that they play in our school community. So we'll continue to push on that front. And then finally, you know, I'm so glad Counselor, you know, George is here. She keeps having to do a lot of in full disclosure because she's contributing in many ways to our city. I'm so glad she's here. But to her point, as a coach, I just wanted to remind you that there was some work being done through the Office of Equity, specifically around Title IX, where athletic directors are required to be annually reporting. I do have some concerns about equitable access, not only to athletics, but there's a great disparity in athletic facilities, specifically the girls' locker room in Madison Park High School, I'll name. But there does sometimes seem that there's a bias in investment in athletics for the boys and not comparable investment for our girls. So I wanted to raise that relative to the teams and also facilities, but all of Title IX, equitable access in terms of access to advanced placement STEM, et cetera. So are you all aware of this effort that took place through the Office of Equity requiring this annual reporting by our athletic directors and an assessment of Title IX requirements across the district?
I'm aware of it, but certainly couldn't get into any specifics around that. I know that our new Assistant Superintendent for Equity, Becky Schuster, will be here on Thursday.
Okay.
And she has a number of goals for her department.
So could you tell her in advance that Counselor Presley will be asking about Title IX?
Definitely.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I thought Councilor Baker was here. Anything else?
Myself.
Okay. Well, that concludes this morning's and through this afternoon's hearing on BPS school budgets. We will adjourn, and then we have a human capital hearing at 2 o'clock. Thank you. This hearing's adjourned.